and we got basically read the riot act. Don't talk about Afghanistan. Nobody wants to hear your bullshit stories. You guys all may think you're heroes, but you're still a piece of shit sprogs. Get the fuck out of my office.
Welcome to Therapy is My Therapy, a podcast where licensed counselor Olivia and unlicensed client Tanya delve deep into real and raw conversations in order to demystify what really happens in that 50-minute hour. Heads up, this podcast contains strong language and sensitive topics related to mental health. If you want to just introduce yourself a little bit and let us know who you are, what's bringing you here, anything that you feel is important for people to know about you.
Absolutely. So my name's Chance Burles. I'm a former Canadian Army combat engineer. I'm also a veterans advocate. I am a podcaster, and I try to make my life a little bit better. And by doing that every day, I try to pass on any of the pieces of knowledge that I have to the rest of the world through my multiple podcasts now. I had one that I ran for about 3 years called Tools for the Toolbox, which talked to other veterans and other people in the world that talked about the tools that they used to live a better life. And then my friend Sean Taylor and I got the collective started up last year. We did an hour-long podcast every day from Jan 1 to December 31st, which was intense. And then we lowered the bar a little bit. I can't say we lowered the bar, but we just didn't do it every day anymore. So we now have a weekly show, The Collective, and we have another weekly show called The Gold Mine. They kind of run in conjunction with each other. But I've been a big proponent of leading a healthy life for the last decade plus, but that took also a journey down into the depths of my own madness to get to where I am now. So it's been a ride.
So I would say our first segment for these kind of podcasts where everyone talks about their journey is we're going to discuss the watershed moment. So what was that moment or moments that led you to realize, whoa, this isn't working and I need to seek help?
There's a couple. The first one, I was still in the military. This was back in 2012. My wife was pregnant. I was in another city. I was actually in Ontario. My wife was in Alberta. I was training soldiers as a recruit instructor. I was constantly working, and I wasn't sleeping. Like I'd be getting maybe 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night, and it would be really broken. It'd be like an hour, maybe 45 minutes here, kind of constantly up and down. And that wasn't new. I had been having these sleep issues for a number of years, and I thought that, by going to this new place, by getting posted as a recruit instructor somewhere else, that would solve all the problems, because I figured that all my problems had to do with the regiment that I was in, the place that I was working, the people there. And I was externalizing it quite a bit and going like, well, it was that guy and these things and blah, blah, blah. So I got to Ontario and I started working, and I was really enjoying myself. I was surrounded by great people. I got to do a lot of really great work. I got to blow things up all the time, which is the greatest thing in the world. And I still was having trouble sleeping. And so I was talking to my wife one day on the phone, and I was like, man, I can't get a good night's sleep. So throughout the week, I'd be training recruits and be getting, 3 to 4 hours sleep a night over and over and over. And then by Friday night, when the troops were off for the weekend, my body would shut down and I'd sleep for like 18 hours. And then I'd wake up on a Sunday and be like, okay, I guess we're doing this again. And and that whole thing would start over again. So I was talking to my wife, and she was like, well, maybe it's just a sleep issue. Like maybe it's like sleep apnea, maybe it's the bed, maybe it's something about the sleep itself. Why don't you go talk to one of the doctors and say, hey man, what's what can you do for me? That was the first point. And then I went in and I went and talked to a doctor, and I was like, yeah, I'm just having some sleep issues, not able to sleep, and so on and so forth. And he asked me a bunch of questions like, are you having nightmares? Do you have flashbacks? Like the basics of diagnosis on post-traumatic stress. And I was like, yeah. But which was normal because everybody else that I knew also had the same issues. And then he was like, oh, wow, well, we need to get you to, one of the actual docs. Like this guy was I think he was a physician's assistant initially. I don't think he was like an actual psychologist. And then they transferred me over to the psychiatrist that shows up every couple of weeks at that base. So I went and started seeing him directly. And he was the one that gave me the first diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, major depressive disorder, anxiety, all these things. And then from there, him and I worked together until I retired. Got out of the military and I went back to Edmonton and I started seeing a psychologist there, which did not go well at all. I saw this guy for about a year, and it was after about 6 months of going to him that I realized that he could not remember my son's name. Like, he had to check his notes every single time. And I was like, what is going on here? And I was also getting worse. So after the end of a session, I would be completely jacked up. It would take me 2 or 3 days to come down to normal. And then I would realize, oh, now I have, it's only 3 days before I have to go back and see this guy. And so then the anxiety would start to ramp up, and then I would see him, and it would just, again, that same cycle would kind of kick through. And this led me to the second watershed moment, which was a friend of mine was like asking me how therapy was going and what it was like and so on and so forth. And I told him the exact same thing I just said. And he was like, oh, why are you seeing him then? And I'm like, well, that's the one the Army sent me to. That was as far as I had thought about it. And he was like, oh, no. You can see whoever you want. And if they're Blue Cross covered, then the VA will cover it. And I was like, why didn't anybody tell me this before? And so that led me into trying to figure out, okay, well, who do I want to see? How do I want to engage? What methodologies are there out there? While I was trying to figure this out, it actually led to my third watershed moment, which was my son was, I think, maybe a year old. And I walked into the room and he flinched just for me walking in the room. And I was like, okay, that's not right. I need to fix this. And so I dove headlong into finding the right therapist, who I still have to this date. And she's awesome. But when I was looking through online to find out what, the best therapist I could find, there was a trauma specialist in town. And I was like, oh, well, that would probably be a good place to start. And then it said equine therapy underneath it. I'm like, I like horses. I'm from Southern Alberta. I grew up around horses. Absolutely. Let's do horses and therapy. Yes. And it was through her and the equine therapy that I made huge strides, massive strides to being who I am today. And then there's been, epiphanies and all kinds of things along the way since then. And that was seven plus years ago, I think now. So it's been a ride.
When you haven't been to therapy before, and especially if you're in a setting like that where you're kind of just handed someone and didn't really get to pick, of that process of like, I don't really feel good when I'm doing this. And I don't feel like they really are like getting it, but you just kind of keep doing it because people tell you it's what you're supposed to do. And then it's so disheartening because I've heard that from clients of like, yeah, I had this therapist and they didn't remember anything about me or it didn't feel like they were paying attention or whatever. And like, it's sad that that's happening in the field in general, but it's also sad that there's not enough knowledge of what it's supposed to look like, that then when people get into it, they don't know if they're doing something wrong or if the issue is with the therapist or the fit. So it's frustrating how often I hear that, but I am glad that you had someone who were like, that's not right. Because I think there's so many people who will spend years in therapy with someone who's not a good fit for them or who's not a good therapist. And it can create more trauma than you already started with.
100%. And to that point, since somebody told me that, I have probably told hundreds of people the same thing of just like, go find somebody that works. If you don't feel like this works within 2 or 3 sessions, bounce, find somebody else, because it's just a waste of time at that point. Not only for yourself, but for the therapist as well. Like if they're not helping you with their modalities, what are you doing? You're just paying them for nothing at that point. So I could not agree more. Is that it is I could be wrong about this. Do you think it has to do with the image of a therapist from like TV, movies, media, stuff like that, of just, lay down on the couch and we're going to talk about your problems and, oh, time's up. So it's so much. See you later. That kind of stuff, versus what, actual therapy is just discussing and challenging your thoughts and trying to figure out new ways to think about stuff and get to a point that you're level so that you can then move beyond that. But I think the media depiction of therapy is probably one of the root causes of this issue. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it definitely is. And when I was in grad school, they had us do an assignment that was basically that of like pick a movie or TV show that shows a representation of therapy and basically dissect the ethical issues that show up in it and how it's wrong. And pretty much every representation that is out there is at least halfway wrong. And I think it's tough on both ends because people then come into session expecting things that we can't give them. And it also makes it hard for them to know if we're doing something wrong, because the way it's depicted in media is that like they do all these fucked up things, but then it's like they give one great piece of advice and the client's healed. And it's like this huge thing that I think it hurts both sides. And I've had so many people come in, and especially now with the way social media is, like, I think there are a lot of benefits to there being more accessibility of mental health conversation. But there's also the downside of then like people will be like, oh, well, I saw on TikTok someone said, you know, this thing, and I thought I was going to come in here for 2 sessions and you were going to give me some piece of information that changes my life. And then that was going to be that. And so I think in general, the media has a big effect on it. And because it's not something that's widely discussed growing up, you have no concept of what a good thing would look like, right? Like, at least with physical health, we kind of have some idea of like good form, bad form. These exercises would probably be helpful for you or whatever. That like with therapy, it's just you're kind of fumbling around in the dark trying to figure it out. And if you don't have a circle of people who are in therapy or have been or have some awareness of it, it's hard to figure out, like you said, if what's going on is right.
One of the reasons why I love your title, and I've said this many times, people always hit me up and they're like, oh, the mats are my therapy. And I'm like, no, they're not. The mats are great, but they're not therapy. The gym is no, it's not. And it just, every time I hear somebody say something is my therapy, it just tells me they've never been to therapy. Like, it is completely different than what everybody thinks it is. And it's really not about feeling good in any way, at least in my experience. And with my doc especially, one of the things that I love about her is the fact that she challenges everything that I say at a matter of course. Anytime I go in, she's like, oh, how are you doing today? I'm like, I'm okay. Are you? Right? Like, and that's, in my mind, what therapy is. It's about being challenged to get to a point that you can come to your own realizations rather than a doctor or somebody, an authority figure telling you, this is how it works all of a sudden. And oh, of course. Why didn't I think of that earlier? Right. It's just, you know what? It brings up a thought in my own head, in the fact that there is, especially in North America, there is a level of almost hero worship or pedestaling of the higher professions, I guess, higher education professions, I should say, not higher professions, but like, you know, this person's a professional. They know. It's like, well, you know, this particular psychologist also has been divorced 3 times and has 2 kids that don't like him. And, you know, like, just because they're in a white coat or in an office doesn't mean that they have all the secrets to the universe, too. So it's an interesting thing in the Western world, especially. And I don't know how accurate this is. I heard this a long time ago, that there was some research done at some point about the prevalence of post-traumatic stress in the first world versus the third world, and that the level of post-traumatic stress in the third world was way lower than the first world, just due to the fact that all the things that are traumatic to the Western world are normal in the third world, right? Death is a matter of course. You lose children on a pretty regular basis. People just walk off. Not to say that those things aren't traumatic in the third world. It's just that they've been normalized to the point that it doesn't create a traumatic response later.
If I may interject, this is just a random take on it now, but in the third world, life is hard. And the thing is, it's post-traumatic stress. There's the post. And if it's just, I don't know what's it called, peri? I don't know what the conjugation is, but if you're just in it all the time, that's just existence.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the more resources that people have, especially like financial or safety of living resources that you have, the less you're forced to confront the true anxieties and hardships of life. And that seems like a good thing when you're in it. But what it actually does in some ways is it sets you up to collapse when something goes wrong, right? Like you were saying in the West, like death is this thing that is so feared and avoided, right? Even getting older, everyone wants to do things to not get older and to not have to experience death. And that is not how life works. And so it creates more trauma when it happens because people don't think it's going to happen because we have all of these distractions to convince us that like, no, I'm good. Not going to happen to me. Whereas in a lot of other countries and cultures, they don't run from it. They just look at it. And so it's still painful, but it doesn't cause the same level of like that jerking feeling of this wasn't supposed to happen.
Interestingly enough, when I was in Afghanistan, a lot of the times we'd hear from not only the Afghan troops, but from, the Taliban and the insurgents would be inshallah, which is God's will, right? And the idea that you can just like let go of those things created an environment where, kids could explore and they could do now they did some seriously dangerous stuff. Like I would never allow my kids to do the things that I saw happen overseas. But that being said, those kids had a better idea of what hard meant, what challenging is, right? Versus, my kids, if I told them to go work out in the fields for the next 12 hours in the sun, that's not going to happen, right? They're going to whine and complain and fall over and they're tired and they're thirsty and they're doing all the things. But I watched Afghan kids work all day in the field, in the sun, in the Afghan desert, from sun up to sundown and not complain, not whine, not do any of those things. And I'm not saying that their way is better by any means, but it reminded me of growing up on the ranch where work was a matter of course. It wasn't an option. You woke up and you did your chores. You carried on with life. That was just the way it is. So there's I don't like the word weakening, but there is a lack of context, I think. The easier your life gets, you have less context to then apply to any of the difficulties that happen throughout life. And it's a challenge.
I'd like to, I guess, connect this current topic of conversation back to the previous one, because I was doing some research on you, and in a previous podcast, 1033 podcast, I believe it's called, sanctuary trauma was discussed. And you describing all the hardships that you witnessed and probably that you went through, definitely that you went through in Afghanistan. And when you came back stateside, that's when it all hits you. Because now you have an actual chance to breathe and have a chance to, like Olivia had said, actually face the things that had happened. I was wondering if we could get into that a bit just for the veterans that would be listening, because I imagine there's this dissonance of what you described of the first worlders where, okay, I'm back home. I'm out of danger. I'm safe. I can order food. I can walk outside and not worry about this, that, and the other thing. Why don't I feel okay? I should feel okay.
That was a really challenging period of time, too. There's the work stress of just trying to do office work after coming back from Afghanistan. So that was one side of it. But then there's also the general life side that is so different. So, in Afghanistan, danger and threat analyses and things like that were a matter of course. They were an everyday thing. You wake up, oh, we need to go somewhere. Okay, everybody get your gear on. Everybody grab your weapons. In my section commander at one point in time, he said, it's not a question of if we get blown up. It's a question of when and how bad. And that was, everyone understood that was 100%. Okay. And if you could make it through a tour of Afghanistan and not hit an IED, it's like you were an outlier at that point, but well done. And so that was life. And then you go back into CAF and you dump your gear and then you jump on a plane and then you're in Canada where you don't need any of that. But don't you? Because life is still dangerous and like these threats are still out there and this is a perfectly normal thing. And we'd been told on multiple occasions by our chain of command, don't post anything on Facebook. The terrorists are watching. Make sure if no one has your address, don't put anything. So there was this thing in the back of our head that was constantly running. I'm like, we're still in danger. We know we're in danger. There are threats out there. And you're looking around watching people going like, why doesn't anybody care? What is happening? Because everybody's just doing things that overseas would get you killed in an instant. So that was a major dissonance, just watching the rest of the population. And then the issue within the workspace, what a lot of people don't know is that when you're in the military, if you're not on exercise or you're not overseas doing something or you're not on task somewhere, it's like an office job. You show up to work every day in the correct uniform, but just like you would show up in a suit going to work, right? And then you do PT in the morning, and then you go down to the bay and you hang out with the rest of your team, and you start doing work, and there's jobs and there's da 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 da. But then you go home at the end of the night. So there's a completely different mindset when you're home and when you're overseas. At the time, this is what I thought, and my first day back. So I flew back from Afghanistan. We arrived like middle of the night. I don't remember what day it was, but we got back, went to bed, got up the next morning, and then you get 3 days at work, and then you get time off to go rest and relax and give yourself some time to go recuperate. But those 3 days back, on my first day, I got brought into my new warrant officer's office with me and 2 other guys, and we got basically read the riot act that if we're going to go down to the bay, there's new guys there. Don't talk about Afghanistan. Nobody wants to hear your bullshit stories. You guys all may think you're heroes, but you're still a piece of shit sprogs. Get the fuck out of my office. And we were like, okay, roger that, warrant, and off you go down to the bay. But the previous night, we had gotten a police escort through downtown Edmonton. While we're on the bus, people were stopping their cars and applauding us as we drove past. We go under an overpass and there'd be flags draped over the edge and fire trucks saluting us. Like it was surreal. You went from doing the job that you were trained to do. You come home, everyone's happy. You're here. You're getting handshakes and high fives, and then you show up to work, and then you get told off that you're a piece of crap, and you're like, well, what's the point of that? I don't want a hero's welcome. That's not what I'm seeking. But what's the point of just reaming us out like that? And that's a whole other side of the story that I'm not going to get into. But that dissonance started right there, where it was just like, what am I doing? And then, day after day, you show up at work. What am I doing? And then I thought, I just need to get back overseas. And if I can just get back overseas, that's where everything made sense. Which, when you stop and think about it, it's pretty weird that I want to go to a war zone for life to make sense. But in my mind, that is the truest sense of life, because we're living in the moment. We are surrounded by people that we love and cherish and will protect us, and we will protect. It is truly in a tribal environment, and we just kind of face the dangers of the world every day with everybody else doing the same thing. And so, we get back to North America, and there's just none of that. You're trying to well, who's got my back? How can I sleep? Because I don't have a rifle beside me anymore. And driving down the road is weird. There's a piece of garbage that would normally hide an IED everywhere all of a sudden, and things like that would create this dissonance. But it was through time and, reacclimatization to the rest of the world that you slowly start to go, oh, right, well. And my therapist did this to me a lot, because I'd be like, well, there could be IEDs just on the road. And they were like, oh, she was like, okay, sure, there might be. What are the odds of that? And I had to sit and do the math for a minute. I'm like, well, it's pretty slim, probably. And she's like, okay, so the odds of it happening are pretty low. You're at a heightened level of awareness. So do you think your level of awareness could come down just a little bit and still be aware of the world, but understanding that the likelihood is lower? I was like, well, yeah. She's like, okay, well, are you capable enough physically that you could handle an altercation? And I was like, at the time I thought, yeah, which this is before I did jiu-jitsu. So I realize now that I had no clue. I had some martial arts experience, but not what I have now. So little things like that she would just continually challenge me on really? It's that big of a deal? And I'd have to kind of go from, well, this is a 9 out of a 10. There's going to be IEDs on the road. And she's like, well, you think maybe it might be in like an 8? And then slowly over time, that became a 6, and then it became a 4, and then it became a 2. And then you start to realize that all of the things that helped you survive in a different environment can still be applied, but without the massive amount of brain power that you'd be using over there. You don't need it here because the likelihoods are that much lower. Similar to, down in the States, I know a lot of guys that are concealed carrier. They carry a pistol on them on a regular basis. And they say it's not about, constantly being vigilant and like always looking around for a gunfight. It's just about having the skills and the training and the awareness that if it's necessary, you can then apply whatever it is, whatever tool, whatever skill, whatever it is that you need to in that moment, versus being totally like constantly aware that there's dangers in the world and we're going to fight everything, that kind of stuff. So it is it was a challenge to manage that dissonance, but it is wholly possible. And it goes a lot faster when you have a good therapist.
Olivia, I mean, there's so much to get into. If you want to, maybe we could discuss why telling people they aren't shit after experiencing a great deal of trauma may not be an ideal approach to get people used to life back home.
Yeah, I mean, it's like going from, I think in a lot of ways, at least in America, the way they get people to join the military is by telling them they're going to be heroes. And then they go do the things and they come home and everyone calls them a hero. And then they're like, all right, well, you're not special. Like, get back to work. And that is, unsurprisingly not effective. But I think a lot of it comes from what we were talking about earlier, right? Of like, if you acknowledge that what people are dealing with is legitimate, then you have to look at it. And if you're still in it, you don't want to look at it. Right? Like if you are in the military and acknowledge, oh shit, I might have to go back there and have that reality be true again. And these people are sitting here talking about what they went through and talking about how much it's messed up their sleep or they're constantly hypervigilant or whatever else. Like listening to that is going to make you more scared. And that's going to make it really harder for you to keep doing what you have to do, which is why a lot of times when people are in those ongoing traumatic situations, like they get viscerally angry and put down people who acknowledge what's happening. And that's like a cyclical issue. It's not as simple as just, okay, I'm out of it, I'm good now. The stress and the trauma becomes comfort because at least people are aware, right? Like when you're in Afghanistan, you might get blown up, you might die, the people you love might die. But then you go back home and that's still true that people might die at any moment. It's less likely that it's going to happen that way or that quickly, but no one else around you, like you said, is paying that any mind. Everyone's walking around like, I'm not going to die. I'm never going to get blown up while I'm driving down the street. I'm not going to have to deal with that. And if they just put that off of like, yeah, I might die one day down there in the future where I don't have to look at it. And so you then go from this space where, yes, it's traumatizing, but everyone around you is acknowledging what's happening. So then you come home and it's just you and whoever else you were with, and everyone's going to have different responses to it, right? People might go back and try to pretend it wasn't that bad or that it's fine or whatever. And it's very isolating because, like you said, everyone around you is just living a regular life. And you're like, hello, can we acknowledge how crazy this is? I think it is the reason why it's so isolating and why it's so common for trauma to turn into PTSD, because there's not a collective agreement in North America to like acknowledge things that are hard. And so I think it just becomes so isolating that you go downward.
Yeah. If I just wanted to make a joke mostly, because when you were describing your warrant officer telling you aren't shit, I was just thinking it's the equivalent of when you go to your parents with like, hey, I went through some stuff. I'm sorry, I was the worst warrant officer ever. And that devaluing is so frustrating. And it's like Olivia described, it's isolating.
It's 100% true, though. When my kids come to me and say, hey, I'm really struggling with whatever, this homework is hard. And I will say, yes, it is. Okay, good. That means you can get better at doing homework, or that means you can this gives you an opportunity to do something to get better in some way. I do that to my kids because I never got that growing up. When I was a kid and I said, oh, this is really hard. And they were like, it's not hard. And you're like, well, but it is to me. No, it's not hard. And you're like, well, that's so that immediate dismissal of your own feelings is, well, it's horrible, first off, but it just like it sucks, because then you start to then question how you interpret the world, which is not an effective way to interpret the world in general if you're questioning everything that you're doing. And one of the points that I try to tell a lot of vets now is in that same way, the vice versa is true as well, in that just because the way we see the world in a certain way based off of being in combat or dealing with IEDs or all these things doesn't mean that we can then apply that to other people. So when somebody else says, oh, this is hard, I can't say, you don't know what hard is. Have you ever been the Afghan sun working? Like, none of that. It's just, okay, yeah, you're right. You know what? It may feel hard. Great. Let's work through that. But again, that's from years of therapy and a lot of mistakes and, raising 2 kids and all these things. So, but it is something that we struggle with as a community within the military, is that we have this, sense of pride and shared hardship and all these great things that we all do. But then we, as a community, try to espouse that to everybody else, which, yeah, sure, I wish the rest of the world had a better understanding of what hard is. I do. But I can't force that vision onto somebody else. And the fact that we have a safe, semi-safe environment in North America and Canada, the United States, those are outliers in human history, right? The fact that we live in a society that is generally safe and that we all kind of agree that we're all going to keep each other safe by following the rules and doing these certain things. That's why we fought. That's why our grandparents fought. That's why their lives were lost to have the life we have right now. So to complain about the fact that, well, nobody else has to deal with all the hardship, well, that's exactly why we did it. So that's also a realization there that you have to kind of come to grips with as a soldier when you volunteer for this, is that you are taking that hardship on for the population. That's the whole point we have a volunteer army. It's the whole point. So just wanted to hammer that in. Even the knife hand. Look at that. The Master Corporal's coming out. Oh my goodness.
I wonder, is the embrace the suck mentality that the men and women who serve in the military have, do they extend the suck to also their mental health? As in, this is what it's supposed to be like?
That is a very good question. And I would say community-wise, no, we don't. But in practice, yes, we do. So I'll tell you a little story, and it's kind of funny. I was on a training course in a small town called Wainwright outside Edmonton. It's where we do a lot of training because it's just a giant open prairie. So there's lots of room to run around and do stuff. We're out there, and it was really crummy out. It was, northern Alberta or central Alberta, where it's like, it's cold enough that you want a jacket, but not cold enough that you need to keep a jacket on. It was cloudy, but not quite rainy. It was just rainy enough that you kind of have to keep your jacket on. So it was just like, it was a crummy day. You couldn't really figure out what it was in terms of weather. And we were out on exercise. We were out doing stuff. It was a leadership course. So we were all like writing orders and trying to give each other tasks and all these things. And me and my buddy were sitting there laying on a hill, just feeling miserable. And we got hit by a sunbeam. The clouds just opened up like, perfect. Bam, sunbeam landed right on us. And it was all of a sudden warm and nice and beautiful. And it was about 3 seconds. My buddy looked over at me and he said, small victories from Wainwright. And we're like, yeah. And then the next day we saw a chipmunk. And I was like, small victories from Wainwright. And so through experience and through time and through, development of yourself within the military, you start to figure out how to embrace the suck, how to actually enjoy those times. And some people look for those small victories, like, yeah, I got a little win today. Yeah, I made it till lunch. Yeah, we made it to this. Oh, we did these things. Some people enjoy the difficulty of it. Like Sean, if you said, hey, man, we got to go wander through a swamp, he'd be like, yes, let's do it. How do we make it harder? Should we crawl through the swamp? Yeah, let's crawl through the swamp. And then we'd be crawling through the swamp and he'd be like, oh, you know what? Hold on a second. We got to stay here for like 10 minutes. Nobody move. And like, he'd be looking for ways to make it more difficult, because at the end of it, there's a sense of accomplishment. You've done the hard thing. And so to embrace the difficulty, Marcus Aurelius said this was, I can't remember the exact freaking quote now. I had it in my head and then I lost it, but it's, the obstacle is the way, right? The difficulty is the path. So if you can embrace that difficulty, then you're going to engage that path that much faster. Whereas if you just kind of like stop and assess, time's still running, right? Your life is still going. But if you can, hit a wall and be like, okay, sweet. How do I get through this? Oh, I got to go under it. Okay. Rather than having to like back up for a few steps or sit down and have a cry or, wail at the wall or, shake your fist at the sky, all these things. None of that actually gets you through the objective, doesn't get you through the difficulty until you actually deal with the difficulty or somebody else comes and deals with it for you. I would say that it's a learned skill, but we don't teach it, so to speak. The military, a lot of times, will just tell you, suck it up, which is not the correct way to do it in my mind, but it's a learned experience. It's a learned skill. And some people do learn it. Some people don't. Some people get into the suck and they're just like, this sucks. And they feel bad about it until they're done. And then they feel bad about the whole experience. And then they leave and they have this bad feeling about the experience. Whereas if you can lean into it, makes life a lot easier. Like editing right now. I hate editing. I hate it with a passion. But I've leaned into it. I'm enjoying it now. Every time I got to make a clip and how can I make this the best clip? Ooh, this is fancy. Ooh, and I start to get crafty and I start, well, what if I switch these people here instead of being in sequence? Or what if I set a difficulty of like, I'm only going to have this clip be a minute long. And that means I got to really tighten everybody's clips, things like that. So I seek the difficulty now rather than back away from it.
Yeah. And that's where so much of like gratitude and creativity come in, that I think when people hear about, oh, just be grateful, like they don't really get the full context of what that means, right? Where it's not saying this isn't hard or you should just be fine, right? It's saying this is hard and you're getting through it. And there's also good things that come with the hard. When you're going through something in life that just sucks, no matter what it is, you're going to find things that you wouldn't have paid attention to before. When it's a really rainy, shitty, cloudy, cold day and you get 1 minute of sunlight, you wouldn't have appreciated that sunlight if you didn't go 6 hours without it standing outside. And the same way that like the way that your friends or family or people show up for you when you're struggling, you can know your friends love you, but then when you're going through something hard and they're with you, that strengthens the relationship. And if you're never going through things that are hard, or you're always finding ways around them instead of going through them, you're going to miss out on all the things that are so seemingly small, but are actually huge. And it's the same thing with creativity of like, if you get someone to solve your problems for you, or you avoid things that are hard, you're never going to learn those like critical thinking skills of like, well, how can I make this better for me, right? Like, how can I make editing more interesting? How can I do these things in a way that it's still going to be hard, but it can be hard in a better way, in a more functional way, versus like doing something hard just because it's hard, which is kind of pointless, right? So I think those are things that people don't realize until they are kind of forced into things. And then like the gratitude starts popping out because you don't really have another way. But I think it's something that, unfortunately, it's given a bad rep in the world of like, oh, just have a gratitude journal and you'll feel so much better. And it's like, well, no, like everything's still going to be really hard, but you're also going to just pay more attention.
I think that's the key, is paying attention. That's the one thing that I think especially in the Western world, we need to do more of. There's lots of words for it, right? Be present, be mindful, whatever you want to call it. But it's just paying attention right now to what's happening right now. Not so much paying attention to what's happening in 15 minutes or what happened 20 years ago, just right now, right here. And to that point, was one of the things that a good therapist will do for you is that if it is a post-traumatic issue, if it is an anxiety issue, whatever it is, they're going to bring you to the present and they're going to work on the present. So yes, bad things happened 20 years ago. Excellent. They did. What about right now? Where are we right now? How are you feeling right now? Oh, we're tense? Okay, well, let's go through a breathing exercise. Good. Are we less tense? Yes. Cool. There's one quick little solve in the moment right now. And I think it's a great point to bring up because I think that's the key to managing any kind of stress or managing any kind of difficulty is presence.
And that concludes this episode of Therapy is My Therapy. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing so you never miss an update. Once again, thanks for tuning in. The content discussed on this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not act as a replacement for therapy. Although we may share tools that have worked for us and talk about symptoms that we've experienced, it is not meant to be used for diagnostic purposes and does not constitute medical advice.